Okay, good.
I promise.
Yes.
You know, if I write it, and I know where I'm going with it.
Right,
It's
right.
just, you know.
All right, well, I will look forward to that. Welcome to Behind the Pages. We're very happy to have Bruce Macbain back on the show with us today. Bruce has been here in the past to talk about some of his other novels, which are historical fiction. Bruce holds a master's degree in the classics and a PhD in ancient history. This book that he's here to talk about today is The Varangian. This is the third of a trilogy centered around the life of Odd Tanglehair, a young man born in Iceland in the early 11th century. This book finds him in the city of Constantinople, where he has entered the city posed as a Russian ambassador. Welcome, Bruce.
Oh, Diane, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is on both sides because I love your books. They're always so exciting. Yes. So tell us a little bit more about this novel. What is Odd doing in Constantinople? And
Okay.
yeah.
All right. First, because I'm afraid I always forget to do this, I want to give a shout out to my son,
Okay.
Anthony, who is an artist and who did the covers for The Ice Queen, for Odin's Child, and for The Varangian, which I'm so proud of. And some interior illustration, and I don't want to let this go with me again forgetting to mention him. Okay.
He has been, yes, yes.
Okay.
And these covers, I just want to say, is this kind of the masthead to the ship, or what is this?
It's from a piece of Viking art, which is a ship's masthead, which he adapted. And I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but the background is specific to each novel. Here we see the skyline of Constantinople with the guardsman with his axe standing on the parapet.
Right. Okay. So this novel.
Yes. Okay. Takes place in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
And the plot is Byzantine in our sense of the word. If I start trying to describe the plot, we'll be here all afternoon. I thought what I might do instead is simply mention some of the characters.
Okay, sure.
First of all, there is young Odd Tanglehair, who, as you said in your introduction, had to flee as a youth from Iceland, and his travels have taken him to Lapland, Norway, Finland, and then in the second book to Russia, and now under false colors, in disguise, he is coming to Constantinople on a mission to assassinate Harold the Ruthless, his sometimes friend, but usually his nemesis, who is hated by Ingigerd. Ingigerd is Princess Ingigerd of the Russes. Persuaded Odd, foolishly, but Odd often does foolish things, to come to Constantinople, find Harold, kill him, and then be rewarded. Okay, and Harold, meantime, has become an officer in the Varangian Guard, which I should say is, and this is real, was the imperial bodyguard recruited entirely from Northmen and from Rus. Which is true of bodyguards often in history. You want to recruit them from people who don't speak the language and who therefore cannot theoretically be inveigled into conspiracies because they're culturally isolated. Okay? Which is the case of Harold. Harold has never managed to learn a word of anybody else's language, which is why he needs Odd, because Odd was chained in slavery to a Greek captive for 4 years and learned the language. So Odd speaks Greek. So Harold needs Odd to be his interpreter in all of the intrigues which he is becoming involved in. Okay, now who else is in the book? John, the guardian of orphans.
Yes.
The evil eunuch, who is in fact the brother of the emperor, Michael IV. He has managed to put his brother on the throne, and there are several other brothers too, all of them eunuchs.
And they were historical people.
They're
Yeah.
real. They are absolutely real. Coming from an obscure provincial family, clawing their way to the top, and John is sinister and powerful and cruel, and he dresses in a monk's robe, although he isn't actually a monk. So anyhow, there's him, the orphanatrophus, the guardian of orphans. Then there is the Empress Zoe. Wonderful character, and I did not have to make her up at all. She is straight from the sources. A sad, eccentric woman in her 60s now, but preternaturally youthful, because she's devoted her life to manufacturing perfume and lotion by the vatful in the palace. You can smell it everywhere you go. And dousing herself with it and giving it to her friends. But she is virtually a prisoner in the palace now. She is married to young Michael IV, who is dying of some strange disease. He is her third husband, but she has no children. She's important because she represents legitimacy dynastically. She is the daughter, the niece, the granddaughter of emperors born in the purple. They need her.
Yes.
You see, without her, they're nothing, these Paphlagonians, John and his brothers. But they treat her horribly.
Yes.
So we have her. And then we have a young bureaucrat named Constantine Sellus.
Yes.
Who's about 20 years old, which is the age that Odd is and that Harold is. These are all young men.
Yeah.
And he becomes Odd's mentor. He is very conceited, very, very proud of himself. He is on his way up. He's a brilliant man. And he is, I must say, not only a character, but he is our chief source for the period. Most of what we know about this period comes from his history, written years later. And he went on to become a powerful force in the government. As
so
well
written
as
by him then?
Yeah, as well as a voluminous writer and lecturer, teacher. But we see him as a youth, right? And there's a scene early in the book where Odd approaches him. Odd is still in disguise as Chirillo. And this is after a banquet, an imperial banquet. And Odd says, Sellus, I think I'm going to be here for a while, you know? I'm not just passing through. I don't understand this, you know? And Odd is curious, always. Odd needs to understand, okay? Unlike Harold, who doesn't really care. Odd needs to know. And he says to Sellus, what is all this? How does it work? And Sellus looks at him skeptically and says, how does what work? What are you talking about? And Odd says, these hundreds and hundreds of officials in their different colored costumes and their unpronounceable titles, what do they do? And Sellus says, what do you care? And Odd says, because I think I'm going to be here, and it's like being a steersman in your home waters. You have to know every shoal and current, and I don't. And Sellus, teach me. And to Sellus, this is irresistible because Sellus is a compulsive teacher. And so he begins to explain, and Odd begins to understand. He says, Odd says, as an aside to us, you might think that this was more information than I wanted, that this was tedious, all of these titles, the Spathero Candidatus and the Logothetus to Dromu, and all. And he says, no, I felt as if the corner of a curtain was just being lifted to show me a world more subtle and more complex than anything my life had ever prepared me for.
Well, that's the whole thing.
And I found it fascinating.
Right, because this is all new for him in a way. It sounds like this is the biggest, most sophisticated city he's ever been in.
Well, this was the biggest, most sophisticated city in the Western world.
Yes,
And by far, even compared to Novgorod or
Yes.
Kiev, which he thought were big cities
Yeah.
when he first came to them.
Yeah.
He said you could put those in a corner of Constantinople, the palace, and above all, the flying throne.
Yes.
And even Celis won't tell him the secret of the flying throne. Celis says, you must allow us to have some secrets.
Yeah, but could you just describe? Okay, so there is a scene where Odd has his hearing with the emperor, his time where he's allowed to present his case, his quote case, to the emperor, and that's what happens. The throne suddenly elevates.
Yes, yes,
high.
and this is true. I mean, we have a first-hand description from an Italian bishop named Luitprand of Cremona, who visited Constantinople in just the generation prior to odds to the setting of the story. Pardon me. And Luitprand describes his audience. He abases himself, he lowers, as you had to do, he approaches the throne, and then he said, I looked up and up and up, and the throne, which a moment ago had been parallel, was now up at the ceiling.
Yeah.
Now, we have no reason to think that Luitprand lied about this. He saw
but
it.
we don't really actually know then how this happened.
I don't want to give away too much.
Right.
Luitprand was a man of apparently no curiosity. Plus, he didn't like the Greeks, and made no attempt to understand this thing that he clearly saw.
Yeah.
Odd, on the other hand, is a person of enormous curiosity,
Yes.
and Odd finally will figure out how it works. Now,
We're not going to tell our listeners, but
I hasten to say we don't really know how it works.
Yeah.
I think I know how it works.
Okay.
Okay, but enough said on that.
Yeah.
But it happened. It was true. There's no reason to think that Luitprand didn't see this.
Yeah, and the one thing we know for the first time we see is that Odd witnesses this is that there aren't strings pulling the throne up.
No,
I mean,
that would be too obvious anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
no, it's not. It's not being hoisted on chains or
Right.
strings.
Yeah.
In addition to which, there are the two golden lions on either side that roar and beat their tails, and then there's the golden tree with the golden birds that sing. I mean, it's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
And it's true. That's,
Wow. Throughout the books, I mean, the real purpose, basically, of Odd's life, or his mission in life, is to avenge the murder of his family. But he keeps getting distracted from this goal. So when he enters Constantinople, he's really not there on that particular mission, though, is he?
No, as he says, sometimes you have to go the long way around to get back home. Ingigerd, Princess Ingigerd, who seduced him back in Novgorod, has promised him that if he will kill Harold for her and bring his head back pickled in a barrel, she will give him an enormous fortune, enough to allow him to return to Iceland, vanquish his enemies, reestablish his family. This is what he's doing for. This is always his goal. Now,
So
if I can just say, what we know
Yeah.
from the framing episodes, that in fact he comes back years later, poor and alone. And we don't know why until we get to the end of this novel. Then we know why.
You're right. I kept hoping, maybe he had gold hidden and he just didn't want to use it. I know that's not the case. But one other thing to explain, why would Ingigerd want Harold dead, and why would Odd have his own reasons for wanting him dead? Is that, for people who haven't read the other books, we should explain that.
Harold is a princeling of Norway, the half-brother of the late King Olaf. Ingigerd was in love with Olaf, although apparently it was unconsummated. But Olaf has a young son, Magnus, and Ingigerd has now transferred her passion for Olaf to this wispy little boy, Magnus, and she is determined that Magnus will be on the throne of Norway. Harold is the threat. You see, Magnus is Olaf's illegitimate son, but Harold is his half-brother, right? So she's determined to thwart Harold, right? Now, Odd signs on as Harold's court poet, as his skald, as his advisor. But Harold treats Odd abysmally, and finally there's a revolution in Novgorod. Harold leaves, taking all the money that's loose, including Odd's, and heading for Constantinople, where he recreates himself as an officer of the guard. So Odd is resentful of Harold and goes there with every intention of killing him.
Yeah.
Well, as we know, Odd sometimes makes poor choices. Right. Harold manages to convince Odd, no, we should be friends again.
Yeah.
And together we will just clean up in this place, right? So Odd yields to this. Right?
In fact, Harold is the one that finds Odd. Odd meant to sort of get him, you know, sort of surprise him, kill him, be done with his job, and leave.
The thing is, Odd will simply go there. Harold will find him, and they'll fight. Yeah. And hopefully Odd will win. Well, it turns out that Harold simply cannot be gotten rid of that way. He's too well protected. He's too powerful. So Odd, all right, maybe it'll work this time.
Well, and in fact, Harold, you know, when he does meet with Odd, he immediately, you know, he immediately actually guesses why Odd is there, correctly guesses. You know, you must be here to kill me. You know, Ingigerd put you up to this. You know, and he says to him, you know, you really deserve a better mistress.
Right.
If Odd were to, I mean, it wasn't really something Odd was meant to answer, but if he were going to, would he agree with that?
That Odd deserved a better mistress than Ingigerd?
Yeah, I mean, what does he think of her at this point?
Odd is completely disenchanted with Ingigerd.
Okay. I mean, there was a time he risked his life for her.
Yes, yeah. Oh, he was in love with her. Yeah. But no, that's over. He's not in love with Ingigerd anymore. But Ingigerd persuaded him that she could help him. And then Harold persuades him that he can help him more, you know, and Odd is kind of torn, you know.
Does Harold, if we could ask Harold, would he tell us that he trusted Odd?
Harold doesn't trust anybody, but he needs Odd.
Yeah.
He needs Odd, as I said, because Harold is socially, is linguistically isolated, and only Odd can talk for him to John the Guardian of Orphans, and they're conspiring together, of course.
Yes.
So, no, he doesn't. Harold is not a person who trusted anybody. I don't imagine.
Right. On the other hand, though, I think Harold is such an egotist that it doesn't occur to him that anyone could resist him for very long if he says he wants to be their friend.
Yeah, that is true. And then Harold takes a step too far. He joins Maniaki's rebellion. This is General George Maniakis, and this all has to do with the campaign in Sicily, and then after that. And Odd goes after him. Odd finally becomes commandant of the guard and has Harold in his mercy, and then lets him go, much to his sorrow a few chapters later. We should mention perhaps also that Odd in the meantime falls in love with a lovely young woman and gets married and has 2 children and feels that he's made his life here.
Yes.
Until suddenly it all crashes down.
Right, which seems to, this literally the story of his life. So early in the book, Odd meets some of the city officials. He's also told that he has to stay in a section of the city earmarked for the barbarians. Well, who are the barbarians?
Well, the Rus. The primitive Russians. And we're told this is true, that they were welcomed as traders because they brought all kinds of trade goods, fur, wax, honey, things that Russia abounds with, and that had a great market in Constantinople, but they were also not trusted because on 3 previous occasions they had in fact attacked Constantinople. So they were confined to the St. Mamas quarter, one little quarter of the city. They could only go out without weapons. Only a few were allowed in at a time, and then they only for a limited time, and then the fleet had to leave again, the trading fleet. So that's true, this is true. They were confined to one quarter of the city.
Odd is brought to the foreign minister first, and he gives his cover story about being there. He's the ambassador, the Russian ambassador, and he's there to arrange a marriage. You know,
with Ingigerd's daughter. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. How good of a liar is Odd?
Well, he carries it off for a while.
Yeah.
He speaks Slavonic.
Mm-hmm.
They're willing to take him at face value,
Mm-hmm.
except that the logothete, who is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the foreign minister,
Mm-hmm.
who is a sympathetic character, a very nice character,
Yeah.
right, does some research,
Mm-hmm.
says, you know, you've never been here before as an ambassador. What happened to the old ambassador? He
Yeah.
begins to get suspicious and puts out feelers, and we have to believe that he has this information network. And
Mm-hmm.
finally he calls Odd in and he says, you're not who you say you are.
Yeah.
Right? And what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
And I can have you thrown in prison right now, or I can have you thrown out of the city right now. And then I say, oh, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
This is when he decides that he has to revivify his relationship with Harold.
Mm-hmm. Right, he has less choices then. He has his, but he did have him kind of going for a while
Yes,
until they
he
could
did.
check his
He did.
sources
He's good
and
at
stuff.
it. Yeah. Odd is very good at
How
that.
does how has that changed in his life from when we first met him? Was he a good liar then?
No, I don't think so. I think
Yeah.
it's his experience of intrigue in
Yeah.
Russia
Yeah.
that has, and in slavery and all the things he's gone through that has made him willing to do this. But fundamentally, Odd is a very frank person.
Yeah.
You know, he's what you see is what's there. You
Yeah.
see. And so he doesn't find it absolutely easy to carry off this imposture, and finally it doesn't work anyhow.
Mm-hmm. And then he's called to the chambers of the Empress Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
She seems to want something from him. She calls him there. What if we could ask her? What would she tell us was useful, could be useful about him to her?
Well, Zoe, as I said, was a terribly mistreated person. She, as Sellis says, some of it her fault, some of it not, but an unhappy woman, now virtually a prisoner in the palace. Sexually frustrated because she's had 3 husbands, all of whom treated her miserably. She's never had a child. She's 60 but looks 40, or if not 30.
Yeah.
She's interested in Odd as a bed partner, although that doesn't happen. Odd said, this is Ingigerd all over again.
Yeah.
If she touches my knee one more time, I'm out of here.
Right, you're right.
But mostly she wants to be rescued from this terrible situation she's in. And we know a great deal about her from Sellis, who knew her well,
Yeah.
and who describes her. He describes the perfume factory,
Yeah.
how as soon as you entered the palace compound, you could smell it. You could
Yeah.
just about follow your nose to
And she actually-
Zoe's chamber.
Yeah, she actually assisted in making this
Well,
perfume.
I don't know that we know that.
Okay.
That may have been something I've added, but she
Okay.
was intimately involved in
Yeah.
concocting
Yeah.
these scents and these perfumes. Now, where does this come from? This we don't know. I've invented a backstory for her that I tell in several episodes
Yeah.
to give us a sense of what might have produced her as a person.
Yeah.
And there I'm going beyond the sources.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. And that whole, her youthfulness, that youthful look that she had, where she looked a lot younger. As a person with a medical background, I think, it's probably because she was pretty much imprisoned. She didn't have exposure to sunlight,
Well,
so
that-
it
yeah.
probably is what
Yes,
kept her
yes.
youthful look.
But people remarked upon her flawless skin, you know, her well into old age. So this we know.
Yeah, yeah. Odd is a person who, it seems like, inspires friendship and enemies, wherever he goes. When he has dinner at Harold's Hall, he immediately meets two men. One is
Bowley
Haldor, I think, and Bowley.
Haldor,
yeah. As soon as he discovers who they are, he kind of flies into a rage, and if someone didn't stop him, would have killed them if he could.
Or they would have killed him.
Or but I mean, it looks like it would have been a fight to the death. What's his history with them?
Well, this goes back to Iceland. Snorri, Haldor rather, is the son, and Bowley is the son-in-law of the great Icelandic chieftain Snorri, who Odd blames for the murder of his family. These are people that if he ever found them, he has sworn himself to kill.
Yes.
And when he finds out, and in this dinner at Harold's in the Varangian barracks, and there were many Icelanders, and these are, Haldor and Bowley are real people, and they did go, they served in the Guard, and they returned rich to Iceland, and they're mentioned in a number of the sagas. As soon as he realizes that these are the son and son-in-law of the man who wiped out his family, he flings himself upon them. Harold, who's gigantic, you know, Harold is like 7, pulls them apart, holds Odd down on the floor, and says, let Iceland quarrels stay in Iceland. As long as you're here, I will keep them from killing you, and you better stay out of their way, because we can't have this.
Right. Now, would they have had any idea, I mean, that their father and father-in-law, you know, were the ones that actually?
Oh yes.
Did they know? Did they know about this?
Well, Odd is
prior to Odd telling them.
Odd is of course a fictitious character. In reality, I have them do know this. They know who Odd is. They know that his father was the heathen renegade, the chieftain who wouldn't go along with the others. They know that Odd's house was burned down with the connivance of Snorri. So yes, they know this. So they all know why they hate each other.
Okay, all right, Well, just in the minute or two that we have left, one other thing I wanted to ask you about is your relationship to Odd. How has that progressed from when you first started writing about him to now?
I've liked Odd from the beginning. I love Odd. He's my favorite literary creation. I like him very much. He's everything I wish I was. Maybe not everything I wish I was, but yes, I like him a lot, and I feel for him. And I think that over the course of 3 novels, I've created him as a sympathetic character, somebody who I certainly have sympathy for. And
very complex, too,
yes,
I might say.
Yes, I think so.
This is a man who is a fierce warrior, and he is a survivor. You know, when these battles happen, he fights. He's not saved by other people. He is a man who carries his own his own weight in battle. But he's a poet, too.
He's also a poet. And one of the things I like best about the Varangian is that he discovers Greek literature. When he and Celis are talking, and Celis says, you know, I don't know why we call you a barbarian. You're no more barbaric than the heroes of Homer. And Odd says, who? And Homer, you know, and at this point, and of course Odd being a poet, loves this poetry, which Celis begins to spout. And because Odd is living in his own heroic age, he understands the age of the Homeric heroes. He gets it, you know? And that's one of the things I like best about the book, you know?
Me too. Well, it was a wonderful book, and I want to
tell
you
are we done already?
We are done already, yes. I want to thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. I always enjoyed these, because they're always much too short.
I agree.
For me, anyway.
Yes. You have been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshkarian. Yes, that was, your books are good, and it's just really nice to have you back on the show.
Oh, well, thank you.
Very comfortable to have these conversations. I could have gone on for a lot longer. But it's always good to leave.